So, Merry, Merry, Merry Christmas for all those for who Christmas starts December 25th. We're back again with our usual traditional Christmas marathon. Yesterday, we already started with Robin from the Ocean. And today, we want to continue this, of course, with fellow Berliner but expat Aidan Baker, the head behind Nadja. Aidan, thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Aidan, we of course want to talk a little bit about the new record that you have out with Fawn Limbs, but we also want to talk a little bit about the band in general. And I have one question. As you have been living in Berlin for quite a few years
Yes.
now, do you feel like an expatriate or somebody who is now already out there in Germany for so long that it doesn't matter anymore?
Um, I mean, both myself and Leah have never been very fond of the term expatriate because it implies a certain nationalism, I guess, that we've never really identified with. So, even though we do still have Canadian citizenship, we have lived in Germany for over a decade now. Um, but I think that gives us more a feeling of being kind of global citizens rather than nationalistic kind of citizens,
Hmm.
which I think is a much more, I don't know, a much more satisfying feeling, just because it has that much more inclusivity and sort of a much broader scope. Um, that said, living in Berlin is kind of an anomaly within Germany, so we can't really say we live a German lifestyle necessarily because the
Hmm.
Berlin experience is pretty unique.
Yeah, it's very different from the rest of Germany, isn't it?
I think
That's
that's
true.
true of a lot of cities. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but also when I'm comparing Berlin to other German cities, it is very, very different. I think even though we have a few more cities with 1 million plus inhabitants, um, Berlin is a little different. I think it's a little more of a global city by now. It's less German. It's much less German than Munich or Hamburg. It's as open as Cologne in a way.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah. But how is it?
Mhm.
Do you now speak German? Könnten wir dieses Interview auf Deutsch führen?
Nein. Ja, ich kann sprechen ein bisschen Deutsch, aber nicht so gut.
All good. All good.
This
I
is
know
another
German is a
problem
very
about
hard
living in
language to
Berlin.
learn.
Most people, yeah, of course. But most people in Berlin automatically speak English as soon as they hear your non-German accent. So it's not so easy to practice here.
That might be the one disadvantage of the city, indeed. So
Yeah.
let's talk
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about the new record with Fawn Limbs. Would you agree in a way that
Okay.
this might be, uh, for lack of a better word, the most brutal record that Nadja has ever been part of?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like our last proper solo band album, Labyrinthine, was also pretty brutal in certain ways, but I think it was less aggressive and more kind of brutal in its dirginess, whereas Vestigial Spectra is much more aggressive, I guess, and in your face.
So, how did this collaboration happen? Who approached who?
Um, we connected with Ely from Fawn Limbs through our mutual label Wolves and Vibrancy,
Mhm.
and played in Helsinki actually just before the pandemic struck in March of 2020, I believe. And Ely came to the show, and we met in person then, and got to chat a little bit, and you know, felt a certain kindred spirit just in our quick conversation we had at the show. And so that was kind of the impetus just to consider working together. And then as everything locked down over the pandemic, we thought, well, we've got some time. Let's start trading some files online and see what happens.
So had you known his band Fawn Limbs and all the other projects that he's in, had you already heard of them before? Probably, right?
Before meeting him, yeah.
Yeah.
We got the records from Wolves and Vibrancy. They connected us with them and got us to listen to the records and stuff. So yeah, I knew the music already and thought, yeah, this is pretty cool. And we hadn't really thought about like immediately that, oh, let's do something collaborative, just because it was a different kind of style. But listening to some of Ely's solo projects or side projects that are more sort of ambient or power electronics, I thought, oh, okay, maybe there's some common ground there.
Yeah. It is interesting when listening to collaboration records, of course, there is always this question, okay, can you, as one of the participants, can you still say, okay, this part is something that we came up with, or this is something that Eli and his bandmate came up with? Is that still distinguishable for you, or is it already flown and morphed together so much that there is no way of knowing who did what?
No, there is. I think it has morphed quite a bit and kind of sort of gelled into something that becomes less identifiable between the two bands. But there are moments where I think, oh yes, I remember that was something that we started, or that was something that they started. But I think that what makes it successful as a collaboration is that it does sort of seem kind of seamless. That is, it's quite difficult to differentiate, not necessarily who's playing what, but where the impetus of the songs might have started.
Would you say that that is the best possible outcome for a collab record, that it morphs into something bigger than the sum of its parts?
Yeah, absolutely. That's often what we look for when we do a collaboration, is that, you know, it takes us somewhere unexpected and it becomes something more than, as you say, the sum of its parts, something new and different from both the contributing projects.
The dog wants attention? No. Yeah, and I mean, like, when we're talking about collaborative records or collaboration records, you have done quite a lot of them. I didn't count them, but I would guess that we land somewhere at 24, 3 maybe collaborative records. Is that something that you always wanted to do? Like, where you say, like, oh, I love collaborating with other people.
No, I don't think it's something that we always thought about doing. It's just sort of something that came up that we thought, oh, this could be interesting to do. And yeah, they're not always successful, or not as successful as we would like them to be necessarily. But you know, let's say 9 times out of 10, the experience is definitely worth the effort. And even if we don't make something that is absolutely stellar, the process itself can be certainly a learning experience, even if we don't end up releasing the album in question.
Is that also something that you say, like, okay, even if, as you said, even if a result isn't stellar, there is still something that we can learn from it for the next records?
Yeah, definitely.
And for everybody out there who is not familiar with the high level of collaboration partners that Aidan and his partner Leah had, we're talking about bands like Fear Falls Burning, A Storm of Light, Year of No Light, Kodiak, Ovo, Trum, Vampilia, and that's just to mention a few. Also, very, very many highly different different artists, different moods, different genres, different atmospheres. When I looked it up, I felt like, oh yeah, that fits here, that fits there. It also, in a way, resembles the near schizophrenic character of Nadja's music, because you're basically all over the place. Is that something that is important to you, not to repeat yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Not just the idea of repeating it to ourselves, but trying to incorporate as many different kind of influences and genre styles that are representative of our own listening, even if it doesn't necessarily come out in the music that we make. I think that helps us keep not only fresh and inspired ourselves, but gives it a certain uniqueness. And something we've aspired to is to never really be put exactly into any sort of pigeonholed genre. Certainly, we're working within a certain spectrum that has a very specific sound or aesthetic, but we like to be able to move across that and range from ambient to heavy to industrial to shoegaze, so there's a variety of sound within what we're working with.
Interesting, because at the same time you say that repetition is something you don't seek in a way, but at the same time the music that you make, of course, has a highly repetitive nature. Interesting.
True, but that's but that's like a structural repetitiveness.
Yeah.
Repetitiveness, is that a word? Repetitiveness within the structure itself. It's not about repeating the sound; it's about using repetition as a tool.
But we compare it to architecture, where, of course, you need a certain level of repetition in order for a building to stand and to keep standing. But the outside facade can be changed.
Sure, that's an apt comparison, because I think structurally most of our songs and compositions are have a relatively similar basis, and then it's the trappings that we put on top that give it a different character or a different feel.
Yeah, because I think, when for example, comparing Luminous Rot with a new record,
Mm-hmm.
I can see what you mean with structurally similar approaches, but the facades are very, very different.
Yeah, definitely.
So when we talk about this new record, Vestigial, how must we envision the songwriting process? I mean, you say that you've met shortly before the pandemic and before the lockdowns. I guess it all happened online, didn't it?
It did, yes.
And then you and Leah went into a studio and recorded your stuff, and they recorded theirs, and then who did the mixing and mastering?
The mixing and mastering Ely handled through his, I've forgotten the guy's name, but yeah, he set that up with someone that he works with regularly in that regard. But I think the starting point was we each decided we would write like a basic structure for one fast song and one slow song each, and trade them, and then see where it went. And essentially, that's the core of the album. And then we kind of added texture and atmosphere and various transitional parts that sort of strung them all together into a cohesive whole. Yeah. And so, yeah, I wasn't, Leah and I weren't so involved with the mixing and mastering process directly, because Ely was handling that. But again, that the final mixes, they did go back and forth a number of times as we compared notes and talked about, different levels and how we wanted things to be presented.
How long did that whole process take, all in all, if you can estimate a little bit?
I think the majority of the actual recording and composing took about, I guess, less than a year. But then the mixing and mastering process was actually much longer. And I'm not sure if that was just, scheduling or what exactly happened. So in all, it took about 2 years for the album to finally be finished.
So now that the record has been out for a few weeks, how happy are you with the response that it got by now?
I'm quite happy. I suspected that most Fawn Limb fans did not know who Nadja was, and that seems to be true. So, and I think vice versa is the same. A lot of our fans had no idea who Fawn Limbs were. So that I think is part of a successful collaboration too, is opening up different fan bases to each other's projects and sort of sharing new fans. So that's been quite satisfying to see that people are discovering each other, both groups.
Yeah, it's a certain kind of, not trying to go into a win-win situation, but trying to also maybe open up the ears of your own followers. I can see that. I can get that.
Yeah.
You've said that, of course. I mean, like, the two bands are very, very distinctly different from each other. Together, it works wonderfully. I think there are many moments on the record where it just flows magically together. Although at one point you would say, okay, this might actually be a Fawn Limbs song, or this might be a Nadja part. But then again, it all flows together wonderfully. There is a certain tonality, which I do not why, but for the sake of me, it somewhat reminds me of film noir soundtracks. I'm very sure that was not an influence, but for me. But you said that you basically agreed on, okay, both bands do a fast and a slow track. For your side, were there any outside influences where you said, like, oh, that is something that I really liked and that inspired me to do this little part?
No, I think it was much more about not necessarily imitating each other exactly, but like taking influence from what they were doing and applying it to our own technique and approach to songwriting. So it was, I mean, that is an outside influence, but it's sort of an internalized outside influence, so to speak.
Whenever I listen to Nadja, I have a feeling that I'm listening to a very, very autark sound universe. Is that so? Are you, in a way, in your own sound bubble where you don't need to have a lot of inspiration, musical inspiration, from the outside?
Sometimes, yes. Not, I wouldn't say exclusively, but quite often the music itself can be inspiring. Like the moment of creation is part of the inspiration.
So like a Deus ex machina thing.
Yeah, I usually use the term like reciprocal feedback.
Then the question, of course, is, I mean, like, I don't know, just a question. Before I come to my real answer, do you have any idea how many albums Discogs lists for Nadja?
No.
73.
I would.
So there are
really?
73,
Okay.
including live records and whatever.
Right.
So we have a huge oeuvre, a huge body of work on the one side. Is there a similarly big body of unused or thrown away material?
Probably not the same size, but definitely there's material that we've thrown away. Yeah. Um, we don't have too many leftovers because we tend to use, if not set tracks in an album or something, some passages will get recycled or patched into another album. So even if we do have some discards, they often eventually get used in some capacity.
And then I guess that you have like an archive where you have all those files or ideas, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, having such an archive, of course, does not diminish the fact that you also have to have that mental archive, you know? So
True.
how how good is your audio memory, you know? Do you still, after like 5 years, know, like, okay, there was this passage in song XYZ that we could use here in this record or in a live environment? Is it really that defined?
No. I would say that happens sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
but not all the times. Certainly there's if I go back to an older album with like the intention of finding an older song to add to the set list that we haven't played for a while or never played or something, and quite often I'll be surprised by it and think, oh, I don't remember this at all. Um, Although usually if I'm thinking about it in that context of wanting to add it to a set, then I at least have some idea in my head. But yeah, I it, it's pretty hit and miss, I would say. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not.
Is there also for you an easy distinction between an Aidan Baker song and a Nadja song? Because you still do solo stuff and solo shows.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, yeah, I mean the easiest distinction is volume. Generally, I don't play such heavy and loud music under my solo name.
Mm-hmm.
That's not always true, but generally speaking.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. Whenever I look through your socials, I have a feeling, okay, officially they live in Berlin, but now they're for a few weeks in Japan. Now they're here. Now, is that also important for you and for you as a musician to get to see as much as possible of this planet of ours?
Yeah, I mean, we've been very fortunate that music has allowed us to travel all over the world and experience different cultures and play for different people. Um, yeah, on the same time, it's also touring is essentially our livelihood. So during the pandemic, of course, that was quite affected. Um, and kind of, I mean, at this on the same moment, there was it was kind of nice to have the respite of the pandemic, in that we not being able to go on tour was a bit of a break in a way, and that did allow us to recharge, I think, to a certain degree. Um, the scary part was figuring out how to earn a living, of course.
Mm, of course. Um, I don't know why, but it just struck me a few days ago that now you are already seeing um, tour announcements for the December of 2024. So a year from now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that also for you something that has happened over the last couple of weeks? Like you can now plan ahead 5, 6, 7, 8 months?
I mean, yeah, I mean, the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years, we've generally been planning on average, say, 10 months in advance. And that's just kind of how the industry has been shifting.
Mm,
It seems to have gotten even more so in recent years, and I think that's a bit of the backlog from the pandemic happening,
mm,
that people are kind of desperate to tour again after not being
mm.
able to. Um, it can make things difficult because obviously if you lock yourself into a schedule a year in advance, if something comes up that you would like to do and can't, it can be frustrating.
So without saying where, but Do you, from the top of your head, know what is the farthest concert date for you next year or the year afterwards? Do you already have that?
At the moment, the farthest is just the end of April, actually. So that's not so far in
Ooh,
advance.
that sounds like a simple plan, huh?
Yeah, almost.
Something that is also something very interesting about Nadja is um, when I listen to your records, I very often have a feeling as if there are two big poles between which the records and sounds are oscillating. Some of your records are very, very brittle, I would say. Some are very fragile. Although, of course, many people would say, like, oh, where's the fragility in there? But, you know, especially with some of the more ambient, more drony stuff, I think there are moments when it's really fragile in the sense that with the next note, the whole thing could collapse.
Mhm.
And then there are other records which are grand. They have a certain kind of splendor.
Mhm.
Is that also something that makes it interesting for you? So where else can I take it? Where else can I go? What little puzzle of a mosaic can I still fit?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of extremism is part of our aesthetic. So that can go either direction. It can be the bombast or the heaviness, but also, yeah, the fragility at the same time. And yeah, I think I mean, I don't want to talk down about other metal bands, but like bombast and volume can sometimes be used too much to
Mhm.
with some music where it just becomes all about that. And I think the contrast for us of the fragile moments and the heavy brutal moments are part of what makes it interesting for us.
One of the first terms that I ever heard about you was sandpaper music. Can you understand why people
Sandpaper.
call sandpaper like where you have to sand off something?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean it is abrasive. There's a lot of distortion happening.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't know that I'd heard anybody call it sandpaper music though.
A friend of mine did that when he was here with us, and I played him a record of which you and I would probably say something very, very different. I was playing him Luminous Rot, and he was like, "Ah, it sounds like
Uh-huh.
sandpaper," and I was like, "It doesn't." Um, but is that also something that you notice for yourself that a lot of people see your work in very, very different ways?
Yes, definitely. And that also is something I really appreciate that people get such different interpretive reflexes or responses to our music. And I think that wide range of experience is really kind of gratifying in a way,
Mm-hmm.
just because the idea that people can get such different things out of that same thing gives me the idea that it's successful in being
Mm-hmm.
something of interest to people.
Is it also a way that this openness towards other people's ideas is something that is important for you when you listen to music? Something that
Yeah.
is not only one meaning, but might have a multitude of meanings?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very important. And I think that's an interesting experience, like particularly in a live setting where you're experiencing something collectively, but each person is having their own individual experience within the collective
Mm-hmm.
moment.
How would you react if somebody in your audience all of a sudden started moshing?
It's happened.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes people will do more interpretive dancing than
Yeah.
moshing, I would say. But yeah, we've had mosh pits before, slow motion ones.
Slow motion. That sounds interesting. If anybody
Yeah.
has a video out there of somebody doing a slow-mo mosh pit to Nadja, please send it to us. We will include it in this video, or we will add it to the video. Let's put it like that. Yeah, I think that is something that is understandable. When I looked through all your records and I tried to count them, I came up with more or less a dozen live records that have been released digitally or in any kind of analog format.
Right.
And you've already spoken about that moment of creation as an important moment for you. Is that something that you can see for yourself doing more and more in the future? Because I have seen there has been a little increase in live recordings recently in the last 2 or 3 years.
You mean an increase in releasing live recordings?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I don't think we don't really prioritize it. We try not to record our shows just out of habit, just because of that sort of Heisenbergian principle of changing it by recording it. So more often than not, it's the venue or the sound engineer or something has taken it upon him or herself to do the recording for us. And I think that's important for us in the process of presenting a live show to not be fixated on the recording itself and be more about the performing. So when they turn out well, it's more like a happy accident in a way.
So then you see a difference when it comes to this point of creation between the creation on a stage and the creation in the studio, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I think there's a very different intention behind the two different acts.
Can you explain that a little bit? What do you mean with different intention? What is your intention, for example, when doing a live show?
Well, that's about creating like this communal experience that I referenced before. So, but sonically, we're trying to make sort of an enveloping sound that collects everyone into the sound, but allows everyone to have their own experience of it. With the recording, I'd say that's more about presenting either a specific sort of idea, our intention of what the album is about, or an experience of, say, the technique or the songwriting, or I guess a more technical approach to what people might appreciate from the sound, rather than being in that moment of in a room feeling the live sound.
Would you say that this communal aspect and this communal experience is hard to put in a to reciprocate? You know what I mean? To lack for words. Do you think that like this communal spirit is hard to be banned onto a live recording?
Yeah, I do. We treat the live recordings more as documents rather than experiential things. So it's more about, we were here then and played this in this place. You can share the audio of it, but not necessarily the experience of it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like if, for example, a sound engineer does a recording from his desk, that of course can be a very, very different experience than first row, of course.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So if I take it correctly, because I first thought, okay, maybe they are now doing more live recordings because the importance of a well-produced, high-fidelity experience is less important. But you say it's more about the communal aspect. So then, to rephrase it a little differently, how important is the production of a record to you?
Well, I know a lot of people consider us lo-fi, and
which I totally disagree with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes from the pedals that we use, which are simple guitar pedals, and they are lo-fi to a certain degree because they have that's their capacity. But I think we use the lo-fi aesthetic of that sound to create high fidelity recordings. They're not, definitely we don't have like a massive studio at our disposal, so they're not, super high fidelity, and we're aware of that. But on the same token, I don't think it's necessary for what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. What also struck me is that sometimes we get collaboration records between Nadja and Aidan Baker. How does that come up?
No, the collaboration, but split records, maybe.
Yeah, split records. Okay, split records.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean that's happened a few times. Quite often, we'll get invitations to do a Nadja set, and I will be offered the support set. So I will open for my own band, which can be interesting to do, just to have a different opportunity to present the sounds that I work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just something I was like, Nadja and Aidan Baker. Strange. But I asked that question specifically because for all those people who are out there and don't know, Nadja, first of all, was your solo project decades ago. How did it feel, or how did you feel when all of a sudden this woman came in and became the second half of Nadja? Like, how was that experience?
I mean, we were already a couple well before that happened, so
Yeah.
we did know each other pretty well already at that point. So it was a relatively easy transition.
Mm-hmm.
And quite bluntly, I invited Leah to join simply to be able to present the music in a live context, because I didn't feel I was capable of doing that properly by myself.
Mm-hmm.
So we did work together on the first record before we played live together. That would be Truth Becomes Death. And the process of that was much the same as it had been when I was just working on the project myself. But as soon as we started to play live and perform together, that I think immediately kind of changed not only the way we worked on recordings or compositions, but the way we presented the music in a live context too.
Did it also change you as a couple?
No, I don't think so.
Good sign. Good sign. I have two more questions. No, three more questions actually before we come to the infamous quickfire round.
Okay.
We have spoken about your numerous collaborations. Now here is your chance to get out into the world with whom you would still like to do a collaboration record. Any wet dreams, like Jess Coleman or Trent Reznor or whoever.
Demon de Glace.
That
would be
would be
thrilling to play with her. We did talk to Henry Rollins once about singing, and he's a fan, but he didn't actually agree to singing on one of our records. But that would be fun to do too.
I'm just imagining in my head a crossover between Liar and Nadja, and I'm like, yep, I'd take that.
Yeah, it could work.
Okay. You also have had a knack for series records, like the Tormo series, which we now, if I saw it correctly, have 3 versions. Or the contrasting records with Vampilia, Primitive World versus Perfect World. Do you consider these kind of series now closed, or could you see yourself doing another chapter?
I would say it's possible for other chapters to resurface. I think we don't necessarily need to, but that doesn't preclude them from happening. Maybe it will someday, maybe it won't. I think with the Taumogenesis series, we played Taumogenesis live, or at least a portion of it, for many years, actually. So it was kind of a staple for us. But we haven't played that now for quite some time. So it may be time to revisit soon. I don't know.
And last question before we quickfire round, and I want to look it up so that I quote the title of a record correctly. A few years ago, you had a record, which maybe I'm stupid, but it looked as if it was referring to the title of a Norwegian band. In 2009, you released When I See the Sun Always Shines on TV.
Yes. Well,
Is
but that
that a
title...
hint at is that a reference to the pop boys from Norway?
Yes, but the title is a reference to two bands,
Wait.
Aha and Codeine.
Oh, okay. So how did it come? Why those two? I mean, like Codeine. First of all, everybody who doesn't know who that is, check out our archive here on our channel, because we had the pleasure of talking to one of the Codeine guys in July. So,
Great.
but how did that?
Yeah, I mean, an idea for a covers album was something we had a few covers in our live staple for a while. The Swans cover and Kids in the Halls cover. So the idea of doing a full album of covers was something we wanted to do kind of as a piss take to all the people who were so deadly serious about drone metal or whatever genre we might be. So it was a bit of we need to show that you can make funny heavy metal.
That's true. If you could choose anybody to cover one of your tracks, who would you like to have choose you or to cover your track, one of your tracks?
Well, I mean, it would be pretty interesting if Aha covered us.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it'd be a nice sort of reciprocal relationship happening there.
Yeah, and I think like they can only gain musically from it, right? So
I would hope so.
So Aidan, first of all, thanks for all those very nice details and for the insight on how you work. I will now transfer you to the infamous quickfire round, where you always get two alternatives and have to choose. It's like Pepsi versus Cola, the Yankees versus the Mets, and so on. And you always have to choose.
Okay.
By the way, for those two examples, there is only one acceptable answer. But anyway, let's start. I tried to come up with eclectic questions for the eclectic nature of your work.
Okay.
And I want to start early. Robert Johnson versus Muddy Waters.
Robert Johnson.
Why? Why Johnson?
I think the idea, like the whole he made a deal with the devil kind of mythology is something intriguing. Whether it's true or not, I mean, well, presumably it's not true, but the idea of, talent being supernatural is kind of interesting.
Suicide versus psychic TV.
Suicide. And I'll just say that's because I don't really listen to psychic TV.
No, but you're totally fine. Totally fine. As you are Canadians, I at least have to give you one Canadian couple. Voivod versus Rush.
Voivod. No question.
I would have thought so. Is it just me, or do you also dislike simply dislike Geddy Lee's voice? Musically, they're untouchable, but as soon as the guy opens his mouth, I'm like,
I'm not as put off by his voice as some people I know, but yes, he does have a very specific quality can be a bit sandpaperish.
That is a good comparison, yes. Cream versus blue cheer.
Hmm. I guess I'll go with cream, if only for Ginger Baker.
That is one of the
No
best reasons
relation,
one
by the
can give,
way,
right?
but still.
But,
Yeah.
um, where would you rather perform? In an intimate club or in a church turned venue? Same
Hmm.
size, same
I
amount of
mean,
people to
we
go in
have
there.
performed it. Oh, okay. Um, if it's a deconsecrated church, then a
Yes,
deconsecrated
must be.
church.
Mm-hmm. Must be. I
Okay.
think you
Then
are
yeah, I'll
not
go with the
allowed.
church.
Okay. I think you are not allowed to play a non-ecclesiastical concert in a consecrated church. Okay.
Hmm.
Nine Inch Nails versus Killing Joke.
Hmm. I think I'll go with Killing Joke, if only because I like the guitars more.
Hmm. Something danceable from the 90s for two old guys like you and me.
Uh,
Left Field versus Underworld.
I've always preferred Underworld. Left
Would
Field's
you would
okay, but I never really listened to them so much.
if I had given you Chemical Brothers versus Underworld, would it still be the same choice?
Yeah, Chemical Brothers I never really liked so much. I'm not sure
Mm,
why. I think they were just a bit too poppy for me.
good point. Maybe that would be a question for Leah, but I'll also ask you. Nina Simone versus Aretha Franklin.
And Nina Simone,
Mm-hmm.
if only because I think Aretha Franklin's reputation kind of got tainted in the 80s with some of the songs she produced then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Last two. I'll give you two Neurosis records, and you please choose one of them. Souls at Zero versus Grace.
Um, I will go with Times of Grace,
Mm-hmm.
if only because it's a much more fully formed record than Souls at Zero. Souls at Zero is great, but you can see it's like a cusp record. It's the record that changed them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you say that Times of Grace is your favorite, or do you prefer Another Affairs?
Uh, it changes between Times at Zero and Through Silver and Blood.
Same with me. Or yeah, yeah, similar. Last one.
Yeah,
Throbbing Gristle versus Einstürzende Neubauten.
I will go with Neubauten because they have, I think they have a larger scope through their discography than Throbbing Gristle did. I mean, there are some really great Throbbing Gristle records, but I think Neubauten has has done a larger scale of things.
I would say so too. And by the way, Blixa, if you listen to this interview, I know you don't, but if you ever
Okay.
listen to this one, that's still a wet dream for me to do an interview. Um, so, Aidan, thanks for your time. For everybody, we are very
Yeah,
close to
no problem.
December when we are very close to Christmas when we did this recording. So, thanks for taking your time in the middle of all the hectic weeks just ahead of
Yeah.
Christmas. For everybody, if you
Just to
haven't
note,
listened, hmm?
just to note, there is one Christmas song on our Bandcamp if people want to dig through and try to find it.
We'll put a link to that one right underneath here in the description. Um, I have a song that you could cover, also Christmas song. Weird Al
Yeah.
Yankovic's "The Night Santa Went Crazy."
Okay, I don't know that song, but I'm gonna have to look
I'll
it
send
up
you a
now.
link to that one. I'll send you a link to that one. So, everybody, if you haven't listened to that new collaborative album by Fawn Limbs and Nadja, please do so. It is really, 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 really good. Just like basically all the records that Aidan has a hand in, and also Leah, of course. So, give yourself a moment of relaxing after this interview, December 25th. I know that there is a lot to do, but another, what is it, 45, 50 minutes will not hurt you. And Aidan, now for you, your chance to spread some final Christmas cheer on this wonderful interview cake that we have here.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I can't think of anything very cheerful about Christmas. Although I do like
Okay.
Berlin at Christmas because usually it empties out and there's nobody in the city, so it's super quiet.
Yeah, that's true. So for everybody, enjoy
So yeah,
this
there's a
25th.
tip, I guess.
What did you say? Sorry.
There's a tip. Try to find some quiet on a Christmas day.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. So everybody, enjoy those days. We'll be back
Yeah.
tomorrow with a new interview for you. Again, something different, as we always try to give you different things. Aidan, enjoy the rest of December, and hope to catch you on tour next year. So
Thank you.
bye bye, my friend.